I'm talking about other issues that I think most Americans and probably most Democrats are concerned about, which is the systematic gutting of the middle class, the elevation of corporations, and particularly polluting corporations, and from the financial industry, from the military-industrial complex, the this kind of corrupt merger of state and corporate power, which is systematically hollowing out the American middle class through wars, through bank bailouts, through lockdowns, et cetera, where we're just printing money to make billionaires richer. And the American middle class during the COVID lockdown, there was a $4.4 trillion shift in wealth from the American middle class to this new oligarchy of billionaires. We created 500 new billionaires with the lockdown, and the billionaires that we already had increased their wealth by 30%. That's just one of the assaults. And then, you go to the bailout of the Silicon Valley Bank, and the war in Ukraine, which is costing us 113 billion. The war in Iraq and the wars that followed that have cost us 8 trillion. The total cost of the lockdowns was 16 trillion. And we got nothing we didn't get anything for all those wars we fought. The $8 trillion, we got zero. We got worse than nothing. And the lockdowns, of course, we got nothing for. So that's $24 trillion in total. And, is it any wonder that we don't have a middle class left in the United States of America? And unless we rebuild the middle class and rebuild our economy at home, our national security is going to fail and our democracy is failed. You cannot have democracy very long when you've got high concentrations of wealth in the same place with widespread poverty.
This word corporatism that you're using quite a lot, I guess most people would not really know what that means. What do you mean by it exactly? It's a sense that somehow the state and big money in the form of corporations have become too close, and you want to put more space between them.
It's the domination of government, and particularly democratic governments, by corporate power.
And what are the examples in your head that are most egregious of that?
Well, I could go on about that all day because I've spent 40 years litigating against the agencies, the regulatory agencies in the United States. So I can tell you that EPA is effectively run by the oil industry, the coal industry, and the pesticide industry. When we sued, when I was on that trial team that brought the Monsanto cases, and we, ended up with a $13 billion settlement after winning 3 trials. But during those trials, we uncovered through discovery email traffic going back years that showed that the head of the pesticide division at EPA was secretly working for Monsanto and was running that agency to promote the mercantile ambitions of that business rather than the public interest. He was killing studies, he was fixing studies, he was ghostwriting studies, and that's true throughout the agencies. I mean, if you look at the pharmaceutical industry in our country, it runs FDA. FDA gets 50% of its budget from big pharma. The CDC spends half of its budget purchasing vaccines from big pharma and then distributing it. So it is a partner, and NIH essentially is just an incubator for new pharmaceutical products. It doesn't really do the kind of basic research that we want them to be doing about where are all these diseases, these chronic diseases and allergic diseases coming from, and autoimmune disease and neurological disease. Why are we seeing this explosion? Now, those kind of studies don't get done. Studies that do get done are studies that develop pharmaceutical products, and then NIH collects royalties when the pharma company sells those products. So you have the regulator that is essentially a partner with the regulated industry. The DOT is run by the railroads in our country and by the airlines. The banks have utterly corrupted the SEC, and of course, And the media has corrupted the FEC.
With all these different examples, is it your sense, and I'm trying to draw a distinction here, between actual corruption? I mean, do you feel like there are individuals within these agencies who are improperly, maybe even illegally, benefiting from these kind of corporate ties? Or is it more of a general sense that they come from the same kind of class, there's a revolving door between those positions, and they tend to sign up to the same way of viewing the world?
It's both. I mean, it's legalized bribery and illegalized bribery. It's both things, and they get rewarded when they leave. I mean, the rules governing conflicts of interest are just ignored, and that's illegal. But they're just systematically ignored. And then, the rules started out not strong enough to really to protect the public interest. So you have both things going on. You have honest, you have what they call honest graft and dishonest graft.
So this sounds like a very kind of a traditional left of center critique of these kinds of bodies, but you're now being accused of being right-wing, or there's some confusion about where you come from politically. Do you think concepts of left and right are less useful than they used to be? Do you think there's a kind of horseshoe happening within politics?
Well, I would say this, that I consider myself a traditional Kennedy liberal. I don't know any of the values that my uncle John Kennedy harbored or my father shared that I don't share. So they had antipathy and suspicion of war and the military-industrial complex. They did not want corporations running the American government. They were completely against censorship. They were against the use of fear as a governing tool, and they spoke out about it often. And you go down the list of the things that they believe in, and I don't think that there's really any daylight between me and what they believed. So I would say it's traditional liberal, but I do think that there is a growing coalition of the left and right in our country, of populist forces on the left and right that are convening now and that are, finding common ground. And I think that really is probably the only thing that is going to rescue American democracy.
So you're quite open about hoping to get interest from potentially conservative voters as well. Is that the idea?
You know what? I always have been. When I spent 35 years as probably the leading and arguably, and I don't want to toot my own horn, but as arguably the leading environmentalist in the country. And I was the only environmentalist who was going on Fox News constantly, on Sean Hannity, on Neil Cavuto, on Bill O'Reilly, on Tucker Carlson. People would say to me, "You're legitimizing those platforms by going on there." And I said, I'm not compromising my values when I go on there. I'm talking to their audiences, and I want to speak to their audiences. How are we going to persuade people? How are we going to end the polarization if we're not talking to each other? No, I'll go on any platform. The only platforms I won't go on are ones that, my wife just can't live with. So, but if it was up to me, I would go on Steve Bannon, and I would go on, I would even go on Alex Jones, because I want to talk to those audiences. And I think there's a rebellion happening in our country now. There's a populist rebellion. And if we don't capture that rebellion, or the forces of idealism, and the forces of generosity and kindness, and making our country an exemplary nation again, somebody else is going to hijack that rebellion for much darker purposes. And I don't think it's a good idea to say we're not going to talk to American populists because they're deplorable. They're Americans. They're our brothers and sisters, and we need to listen to them. And their backs are against the wall because of policies that have come down from both Republican and Democratic parties.
One name that you didn't mention there, but is being talked about quite a lot at the moment, is Tucker Carlson, who obviously lost his job in the last week that he tends to surprisingly agree with you about quite a lot of things, even though he's thought of as a right-wing conservative. What is your view of Tucker Carlson?
I think Tucker is now at this point, and by the way, there was nobody during most of his career who was more critical of Tucker Carlson than I am of his policies. I would still go on his show because I want to talk to his audience. But I think Tucker has evolved over the past 3 years into probably one of the leading populist voices in our country. So, he's one of the only people on American television that's talking about free speech. Is extraordinary because it used to be when I was growing up that the people who were most militant, who were the First Amendment absolutists, were journalists. And journalists do not seem, the average American journalist seems not the least bit concerned by government orchestrated censorship today. It's very, very strange.